President Trump this week continuing his push for the reopening of schools in the fall, even threatening to cut off federal funds to schools that fail to reopen. This comes as states across the country see a resurgence of coronavirus cases. But our next guest says, look, the data is clear. Kids should be in school. Christina Ramirez, UCLA Fielding School of Public Health, Professor of Biostatistics. She joins us now. Christina, Professor, talk us through the data. Why is it so clear?
Well, we're seeing, thank you for having me on. We're seeing that, especially in other countries that have opened their schools, the children are not, they're not the source of transmission for spread. And so we found that the data from the SARS outbreak in mainland China, Hong Kong, Singapore, that school closures didn't contribute to the control of the epidemic. And a study from the Institut Pasteur that looked at schools in France for areas of high transmission, they did not find evidence of transmission from the children in the school setting. So children don't seem to be the big source of transmission. And so mainly it's adult to children instead of children to adults. So the data is emerging that schools are not really the source of spread, but we have good data that shows the detrimental effects of keeping kids out of school. And so, and that's what I really worry about, is that this interruption is really jeopardizing the chances of an entire generation of young people, especially those who have the fewest resources and are more likely to be children of essential workers and families of color.
We'll talk a little bit more about that side of the equation here. I mean, we got a little bit of a taste at the end of the school year, the past school year, where most kids either had to do it online on their Zoom or whatever Google platform that they might be using at school. And then, of course, some kids, some of the schools just basically just shut down and let the parents and kids sort of fend for themselves. What type of data do you have out there that would show the detriment of doing something like that going into the new school year?
Right. So we see from the Brookings Institute, the NWEA, and others that they're expecting that kids have lost up to a year of schooling in mathematics. And these gaps in achievement are cumulative, and we see that especially children of lower socioeconomic status whose parents can't afford tutors, maybe they didn't have high-speed internet or individual devices for each of their children, that this gap is going to become a chasm. And as these accumulate, it's going to be very hard for these children to catch up, and they're more likely to get frustrated and drop out, become depressed, and have high levels of anxiety. And pediatricians are seeing this in their offices.
Professor, you talked about an entire generation losing up to a year almost in education. What is the best course of action? Do some kids need to be repeating grades? Does everyone need to redo the school year? I'm worried a lot about a generation that's already fallen behind in those key, crucial math and science skills relative to other countries.
Yes, I worry about this too. So teachers, when the students come back, they need to realize that everybody is going to be at different levels, and they're going to have a really hard time, but they really need to be understanding that students, especially ones who may not have had access to these online platforms, that they're going to be behind, and we have to figure out ways to keep them with the class so that they don't get discouraged. And especially in mathematics, where we know in the summer slide that kids can lose 3 months of schooling, and they even up to half a year. And they also lose English skills, but not as much. But we see a really big socioeconomic divide in the gap in the summer slide and now this COVID slide.
Christina, I'm interested in where perhaps globally is doing it right. We've seen other countries, I'm thinking of the UK where I am from, that's been talking about sending back to schools, and that was a real focus and priority for the government. Where's managing to open schools and build up confidence to do so?
Yes, and so far, about 20 schools have decided to reopen, and they have not seen an increase in cases, which gives us hope that this can be done safely. And so perhaps we need to think of things where, especially for single parents who might be essential workers, that school is also their choice of daycare, and that if schools do not reopen in the fall, they're going to have to make an impossible decision of do you watch your kids or do you go to work to provide food for your family? And this is a terrible situation for any kid and any parent to be in. And I really worry about these things.